It's no secret that Entry Point has been finished for a while now. Yet people seem to keep playing it even after 2 years of its original ending and 1 year after its final update. Is it because of a good gameplay loop? Nostalgia? Boredom? Maybe none of those things? Well, I'm here to figure out if Entry Point still holds up in 2023, 6 years after its initial release. To be totally honest, I can't really leave the game behind either. I guess this video is a way to say goodbye since I never really did that. To start off, let's begin with the main content, the missions. I've played them all basically to death, and really there isn't much replayability in any of the 15 missions we have. Sometimes objectives are switched up due to difficulty, like in the withdrawal, but most of the time the mission objectives remain the same, only depending on stealth or loud. It's easy to memorize what you have to do in each mission, so it just keeps getting repetitive. In terms of loud and stealth, things do change between the two, sometimes not by much, and other times it is very different. Though the same argument could be said as each way of playing can easily become memorized and become boring. Even doing Legend for me only presented some difficulty in loud, whereas in stealth it's a bit better, but not too far behind. The only real difficulty spikes are in full stealth or loud Iron Man, which most of the time you don't want to sink that much time into. It is nice to come back to some missions after a while of not playing them, but eventually they get boring again. And I don't think waiting a couple months to make something not boring again is a good gameplay loop. The missions are fun and all, they just don't give good replayability in terms of shaking things up. Moving on to weapons. At this point, it's pretty well known that the two meta-guns for loud are the F57 and the Cha, meaning you shouldn't really use anything else because they're just not as good, though that doesn't stop me from trying other guns. In my quest to see if this game still holds up, I tried every gun in the game, mainly for loud, since guns don't really matter in stealth as long as they're concealed. Playing with different weapons and playstyles is a bit more fun to me, and it does help the game with being a bit more interesting. The only real fun in using other weapons is the challenge, and I think it's nice. It gives the game a bit more spice, but you can only use them for so long until they either become stale or annoying because they aren't as good as the meta weapons. Honestly though, if you do want to get into Entry Point again, I would have to recommend trying the other guns other than the F57 and the Chaw. The community and other game modes are kind of a mixed bag. Most of the community can be really nice and helpful, though there is a few minority that is pretty toxic and probably not worth putting up with. To be totally honest, the community did make Entry Point really successful, and waiting with everyone for a new mission to release did have that special feeling with it. That's somewhat over as Entry Point isn't getting any new content, and the only thing we can wait for is Sish's new game, which I hope they don't rush. Shadow War is another thing that's pretty dependent on the community, seeing as you need other people playing it for it to work. Sometimes it's really fun, especially with nicer people, other times it's not great with some of the people being pretty rude. The other game modes, such as the PvP elimination and deathmatch, are basically never talked about anymore because of Shadow War killing them off, and I don't really blame anyone for that since they're basically the same thing, maybe even a little worse than Shadow War. Daily challenges do add a bit more to this game with modifiers and different challenges to complete missions you already know in different ways. The only thing hurting this forever update is the fact that it isn't forever, since there isn't any more skins being added to the game. Plus, you do have to wait a day for the next challenge, and getting all the weapon skins takes a really long time. In fact, it takes a whopping 264 days to get all of them. That's to say, the only thing keeping this game alive is a daily thing that may or may not take a short amount of time to complete. The only other thing I can think of to try and rekindle Entry Point as a game for you is trying other classes and having different operators. It definitely can shake things up if you try to play the game as a pure hacker, a technician, or a specialist, but most of the time you don't want to make new characters or you don't have a level 100 game pass. As you can tell though, most of the classes that shake things up to me deal with a lack of lockpicks and thief skills and the adding of drill skills. This really goes to show what the meta classes are and that it's not entirely worth it to deviate from them unless you're looking for a challenge and you have enough money to do so. All there to say is if you really want to replay Entry Point is to challenge yourself. Even then I understand if you've played it for a long time there isn't really anything you can do since you've done everything there is to offer. Maybe I'm the only one that really hasn't moved on since I'm probably the only one still talking about this. I think it's probably time to say goodbye, at least for me. Hopefully I can actually try and do different types of content from now on. Until then, I'm going to be finishing up all the daily challenges. Remember to subscribe or commit Entry Point. I mean, I guess it makes sense now that it's actually dead.